You can't be here. I work here. This is a federal building. Employees use the badge entrance. I don't have my badge yet. I start today. Sure you do. Step away from the entrance. I'm the new regional director, and I suggest you check with your supervisor before this goes any further. Lady, I've worked here for 6 years. I know every director. You're not one of them. I'm the new one, appointed 3 weeks ago. Now move aside or you'll be explaining this to HR by noon. Officer Kevin Marshall had been with the Federal Protective Service for 6 years when he made a decision that would end his federal career and cost the government $5.4 million. He was 32 years old, experienced enough to recognize the difference between a security threat and a new employee, but apparently convinced that black women in business attire couldn't possibly be federal executives. One Monday morning outside the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Los Angeles, he stopped a woman trying to enter for her first day of work and refused to believe she was the newly appointed Regional Director of the General Services Administration. That woman was Dr. Cassandra Hayes, a 4-year-old federal executive with 18 years of government service who'd been personally selected by the GSA administrator to oversee a $2.3 billion regional budget and 847 employees. What Marshall did next, blocking her entry, demanding excessive proof of identity, and detaining her until her own staff arrived to verify who she was, would become the incident that demonstrated how racial bias operates even at the highest levels of federal service. Before we get into what happened, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these show that even federal executives aren't immune to racial profiling, and your support helps us expose these patterns. Let's continue. A black woman in her mid-40s secunda, Dr. Cassandra Hayes, was standing at the main entrance of the Ronald Reagan Federal Building, holding her appointment letter, her official GSA documentation, and her personal identification. Her temporary access badge was supposed to be waiting at security inside the building. Her permanent credentials would be issued after HR processing. No security threat, no unauthorized entry attempt, no violation, just a newly appointed federal executive arriving for her first day of work. But to Officer Kevin Marshall, a Federal Protective Service officer with 6 years on the job and a pattern of questioning black employees' credentials, she looked like someone trying to gain unauthorized access to a federal facility. The Ronald Reagan Federal Building sits on Wilshire Boulevard in West Los Angeles. It's a massive 17-story structure that houses multiple federal agencies: the General Services Administration Regional Headquarters, the Social Security Administration, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Immigration and Customs Enforcement offices, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Los Angeles Field Office. The building serves over 4,000 federal employees and sees thousands of visitors each week. Security is managed by the Federal Protective Service, uniformed officers responsible for screening visitors, monitoring access points, and protecting federal personnel and property. The main entrance has airport-style security, metal detectors, X-ray machines, and FPS officers checking credentials. It was 7:45 a.m. on a Monday in early September. The weather was perfect, mid-60 seconds with clear skies. The morning rush was just beginning, federal employees arriving for 8 a.m. start times, visitors checking in for appointments. The plaza in front of the building was busy but not crowded. Dr. Hayes had arrived early, wanting to settle into her new office before the workday officially began. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit, white silk blouse, and black heels. Professional federal executive attire. She carried a leather briefcase containing her appointment letter from the GSA administrator, her personnel file, and documents for her first day. Dr. Cassandra Hayes had been in federal service for 18 years. 18 years working her way from entry-level analyst to regional executive positions that managed billion-dollar budgets and hundreds of employees. She'd started at the Department of Housing and Urban Development as a policy analyst, fresh out of graduate school, spent 5 years analyzing housing programs and urban development initiatives. She'd moved to the Office of Management and Budget, where she spent 6 years as a budget examiner, reviewing federal agency spending and making recommendations to the President's Budget Office. Then she'd joined the General Services Administration as a Deputy Regional Director in San Francisco, managing facilities, procurement, and real estate operations for federal agencies across Northern California. She'd spent 7 years in San Francisco building a reputation as an exceptional manager who delivered results under budget and ahead of schedule. 3 weeks ago, the GSA administrator had personally called her. The Los Angeles region needed new leadership. The previous director had retired. The region managed 47 federal buildings, $2.3 billion in annual budget, 847 employees, and procurement contracts for dozens of federal agencies. It was one of GSA's most important regions. The administrator wanted someone with Hayes' experience, someone who understood federal operations, someone who could manage complex budgets and diverse teams. Hayes had accepted immediately. Dr. Hayes had earned every credential. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a degree in economics, then earned her master's in public administration from Columbia and her doctorate in public policy from UCLA. She'd published research on federal management practices. She'd testified before congressional committees about government efficiency. She'd received the Presidential Rank Award for meritorious executive service, one of the federal government's highest honors for career civil servants. At 44 years old, she was exactly where she'd worked to be, leading a major federal region, overseeing critical operations, serving the American people at the highest levels of the civil service. That Monday morning, Hayes had driven from her hotel in Santa Monica to the federal building, arriving at 7:40 a.m. She'd been told to enter through the main entrance, where a temporary badge would be waiting at the security desk. HR would process her permanent credentials during her first week. She walked across the plaza toward the main entrance, briefcase in hand, excited for her first day leading the region. She approached the entrance where Officer Kevin Marshall was stationed. Officer Kevin Marshall was 32 years old. He'd been with the Federal Protective Service for 6 years, all of it assigned to the Reagan Federal Building. FPS was the law enforcement agency responsible for protecting federal facilities, federal employees, and federal property. Officers screened visitors, responded to threats, and maintained security protocols. Marshall's job was straightforward: check credentials, verify identities, prevent unauthorized access. His supervisors considered him reliable and thorough, which was code for overly suspicious and quick to challenge people he didn't think belonged. In 6 years, Marshall had compiled 8 complaints. 8. 6 involved questioning black employees' credentials more aggressively than white employees. 1 involved stopping a black congressman's aide and refusing to accept her congressional identification. Another involved detaining a black federal attorney until 3 colleagues verified her identity. Each complaint was investigated by FPS Internal Affairs. Each was closed with findings of no policy violation. Marshall was counseled about his approach. He was reminded about treating all employees equally. He attended diversity training. Nothing changed. He continued seeing black federal employees as potential security threats rather than colleagues. That Monday morning, Marshall was stationed at the main entrance when he saw Dr. Hayes approaching. He saw a black woman in business attire but no visible badge. Federal employees were required to display badges. She didn't have one. In his mind, she was trying to enter without proper credentials. He stepped in front of the door. Do you think federal security officers should receive files with photos of incoming executive appointments? Drop your answer below. Dr. Hayes reached the entrance and moved toward the door. Marshall blocked her path. You can't be here. Hayes stopped, confused. Excuse me? I work here. This is a federal building. Employees use the badge entrance around the side. I don't have my badge yet. I start today. I was told to check in at the main security desk for a temporary badge. Marshall crossed his arms. What agency? GSA. General Services Administration. What position? Hayes felt her patience thinning. I'm the Regional Director. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check in with security inside. Marshall didn't move. I've worked here 6 years. I know every GSA director. You're not one of them. I'm the new Regional Director, appointed 3 weeks ago by the GSA Administrator. My first day is today. Now, move aside. Marshall's expression hardened. I'm going to need to see some identification. Hayes set her briefcase down and pulled out her wallet. She handed him her driver's license. He examined it. Dr. Cassandra Hayes, California address. He handed it back. That doesn't prove you work here. Of course it doesn't. My appointment letter proves I work here. Hayes opened her briefcase and pulled out the official letter, GSA letterhead, signed by the administrator. dated 3 weeks earlier. Dr. Cassandra Hayes is hereby appointed Regional Director, GSA, Pacific Region, effective September 4th. She held it up. Marshall glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds. Anyone can print a letter. This is where bias becomes an impenetrable wall. Officer Marshall had stopped a black woman at the entrance to a federal building. When she said she worked there, he didn't believe her. When she said she was the regional director, he dismissed it as impossible. When she showed him an official appointment letter from the GSA administrator, he suggested it was fake. He decided she didn't belong and no evidence could change his mind. Officer, that letter is on official GSA letterhead with the administrator's signature. You can verify it with one phone call to GSA headquarters or to the regional office upstairs. I'm asking you to make that call before you create a serious problem. Marshall pulled out his radio. I'm calling my supervisor. You do that. And while you're at it, get the building's HR director. Because when they confirm who I am, you're going to need HR. Should federal officers face immediate suspension for questioning executive appointments without verification? Let me know what you think. Marshall keyed his radio. Supervisor to main entrance. I've got someone claiming to be a GSA director, but no credentials. Within 2 minutes, a sergeant arrived. Deanna Torres, a 14-year FPS veteran who'd worked the Reagan Building for 8 years and knew the GSA regional office well. She walked up, saw Marshall blocking a woman in professional attire, and immediately sensed a problem. Marshall, what's going on? Sarge? This woman claims she's the new GSA regional director. No badge, just some printed letter. I'm not letting her in without verification. Torres turned to Hayes. Ma'am, can I see your identification? Hayes handed over her driver's license and appointment letter. Torres read the letter carefully. Official letterhead, administrator's signature, specific appointment details. She looked at Hayes. Dr. Hayes, welcome to Los Angeles. I apologize for this. Officer Marshall is new to executive appointments. Marshall interrupted. Sarge, how do we know that letter's real? Torres's voice dropped. Because I received an email last week from GSA HR notifying all FPS personnel that the new regional director starts today. Dr. Cassandra Hayes, which is exactly who this is. She handed the documents back to Hayes. Ma'am, I sincerely apologize. Please come inside. I'll escort you to the GSA offices personally. Hayes picked up her briefcase. Sergeant Torres, I appreciate the apology, but this isn't about confusion. Officer Marshall saw a black woman and decided I couldn't possibly be an executive. He dismissed my appointment letter as fake without verification. He blocked my entry to my own workplace. I will be filing a formal complaint with FPS and with GSA's Office of Civil Rights. Torres nodded. That's absolutely your right, ma'am. And I'll be filing a report on this incident myself. Hayes turned to Marshall. Officer, my first meeting this morning is with the building's facility manager to discuss security protocols. My second meeting is with the GSA deputy administrator who flew in from DC for my first day. My third meeting is reviewing personnel files for this region. That includes the files of FPS officers assigned to this building. I suggest you think very carefully about that. She walked past him into the building. Marshall stood frozen, finally understanding what he'd done. He'd blocked the new regional director, the executive who oversaw the building where he worked, the person who would review his personnel file. 2 hours later, Marshall was called to the FPS regional supervisor's office. Hayes had indeed filed a formal complaint. She'd also done something more significant. She'd requested Marshall's complete personnel file as part of her review of building security operations. That file contained 8 complaints in 6 years, 6 involving black employees. A pattern so clear that anyone reviewing it honestly would recognize systemic bias. And now the file was sitting on the desk of a black woman executive who just experienced that bias firsthand. The meeting was brief. The FPS regional supervisor, Marcus Webb, had reviewed Marshall's file. He'd read Hayes' complaint. He'd spoken with Sergeant Torres, who confirmed every detail. The conclusion was inescapable. Marshall had a documented pattern of racial profiling, and he'd just targeted the highest-ranking federal executive in the building. Marshall, you're suspended pending investigation. Badge and weapon. Sir, I was just doing my job. You blocked a regional director from entering her own building. You dismissed an official appointment letter as fake. You have 8 complaints showing you target black employees. Badge and weapon. Now. Marshall handed them over. His 6-year federal career was ending. Should federal executives have authority to immediately remove security officers who detained them? Drop your answer. Within a week, the story had spread through federal circles in Los Angeles and Washington. A federal protective service officer had blocked the new GSA regional director on her first day. The irony was brutal. The officer who'd questioned whether she belonged was about to learn she had authority over his employment. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association issued a statement supporting professional standards. The National Treasury Employees Union, which represented FPS officers, reviewed Marshall's file and declined to contest disciplinary action. The head of GSA issued a memo to all regional offices reaffirming that discrimination would not be tolerated. Officer Kevin Marshall's federal career collapsed within weeks. FPS placed him on unpaid suspension. An investigation was launched reviewing not just this incident, but Marshall's entire 6-year record. The findings were damning. 8 complaints in 6 years, 6 involving black employees, all showing the same pattern of demanding extra proof, questioning credentials more aggressively, assuming black federal employees were lying about their positions. The complaints had been investigated and closed, but no one had connected them. No one had recognized the pattern until Dr. Hayes' complaint forced a comprehensive review. Marshall's union representative attempted to fight the termination. They argued he'd been following security protocols, that he'd had no way of knowing Hayes was the new director, that he'd made an honest mistake. The argument collapsed when investigators showed him the email sent to all FPS officers the previous week announcing Hayes' appointment, her start date, and her position. Marshall had received the email. He'd read it. He'd known a new GSA regional director was starting that Monday. He'd still blocked her entry when he saw a black woman claiming to be that director. Marshall was terminated 8 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was direct and final. Officer Marshall blocked a newly appointed regional director from entering the federal building where she was assigned to lead operations. Despite receiving advance notification of her appointment, Officer Marshall refused to accept her identification and official appointment letter, suggesting they were fraudulent. This incident, combined with 8 prior complaints showing a pattern of racial bias in questioning black employees' credentials, demonstrates Officer Marshall is unsuitable for federal law enforcement service. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Marshall's name was entered into the federal law enforcement database. He would never work federal security again. He released no public statement. But Dr. Hayes also filed a formal complaint with the GSA's Office of Civil Rights and consulted with federal employment attorneys. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about a pattern of discrimination that FPS had documented and ignored for 6 years. Hayes filed an equal employment opportunity complaint, the formal process for federal discrimination claims, alleging that Marshall's actions were part of a hostile work environment that FPS had failed to address despite clear documentation. The EEO investigation was comprehensive. Investigators reviewed all 8 complaints against Marshall. They interviewed the employees who'd filed those complaints. They examined FPS response to each complaint. What they found was systemic failure. Complaints investigated but never analyzed for patterns. Officers counseled but never disciplined meaningfully. Black employees forced to prove their identity more aggressively than white employees, and a security culture that validated suspicion of black professionals. The EEO investigation resulted in findings of discrimination. FPS had failed to address Marshall's pattern of bias. GSA, as the agency responsible for the building, had failed to ensure equal treatment of employees. The findings recommended policy changes, mandatory training, and compensation for Dr. Hayes. Hayes also filed a federal lawsuit. Unlike state or local cases, suing the federal government required different procedures, but the claims were similar. Discrimination based on race in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, hostile work environment for the pattern of bias black employees faced from FPS at the building, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for the public humiliation on her first day as regional director. The Department of Justice, which defended federal agencies in civil rights lawsuits, reviewed the case. Marshall's personnel file, the 8 complaints, the EEO findings, the email proving Marshall knew about Hayes' appointment, the facts were indefensible. DOJ attorneys recommended immediate settlement, 22 months after the incident, the federal government settled for $5.4 million. The settlement included requirements that FPS implement mandatory notification protocols requiring all officers to receive photos and details of incoming executive appointments, establish a 2-complaint threshold for pattern investigation, require all complaints involving racial bias to be reviewed by regional civil rights offices, and terminate Officer Kevin Marshall's appeal of his termination. Should federal agencies face congressional oversight after discrimination settlements exceeding $1 million? Let me know in the comments. Dr. Cassandra Hayes testified before a House Oversight Committee hearing on discrimination in federal law enforcement 18 months after the incident. She'd been subpoenaed to discuss her experience and recommend reforms. Her testimony was measured, precise, and devastating. I'm Dr. Cassandra Hayes. I'm the Regional Director of GSA's Pacific Region. I oversee $2.3 billion in annual operations and 847 federal employees. I have 18 years of federal service. I hold a doctorate in public policy from UCLA. I've received the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Executive Service. I was personally selected by the GSA administrator to lead this region. She paused, looking at the committee members. And none of that mattered when Officer Marshall saw me on my first day of work. He saw a black woman approaching a federal building and decided I couldn't possibly be an executive. I told him I was the regional director. He didn't believe me. I showed him my official appointment letter with the administrator's signature. He suggested it was fake. I offered him multiple ways to verify my identity. He refused and blocked my entry. Her voice strengthened. What makes this particularly egregious is that Officer Marshall had received an email the week before announcing my appointment. He knew a new regional director was starting that Monday. He knew my name, he knew my position, and when he saw a black woman claiming to be that director, he still refused to believe it. That's not a security protocol. That's racial bias. She leaned forward. Officer Marshall had 8 complaints in 6 years. 8. 6 involved black federal employees. Each complaint showed the same pattern. Black employees questioned more aggressively, required to provide extra proof, treated as potential threats rather than colleagues. And every single complaint was investigated and closed without recognizing the pattern. It took me filing a complaint as a regional director before anyone connected the dots. Her tone became sharper. I want to be clear about what this means for federal service. We recruit talented people to work for the government. We train them. We promote them based on merit. We appoint them to executive positions. And then we allow security officers with documented bias to block them from their own workplaces. That's not just discrimination. That's a systemic failure that tells black federal employees they will never be seen as legitimate no matter how high they rise. The committee room was silent. Should Congress mandate annual reporting of discrimination complaints in all federal law enforcement agencies? Drop your answer. This wasn't just about one blocked entrance. This was about a system that documented 8 complaints showing Officer Marshall's pattern of racial bias and did nothing until he targeted someone with enough power to force accountability. 6 complaints involving black employees over 6 years. Each investigated individually, never analyzed collectively, never treated as evidence of systemic bias. Marshall was counseled, sent to training, and returned to the same position where he continued the same behavior. The FPS supervisors who reviewed those complaints failed to see what was obvious. An officer who consistently questioned black employees' credentials more aggressively than white employees' credentials was engaging in racial profiling. The investigators who closed those complaints failed to recommend pattern analysis. The trainers who conducted diversity sessions failed to change Marshall's behavior because training doesn't fix bias when there are no consequences for discriminatory conduct. The system failed at every level. Officers who investigated complaints failed to flag patterns. Sergeants who supervised Marshall failed to recognize his bias. Regional supervisors who reviewed his file failed to remove him from a position requiring interaction with diverse federal employees. The FPS leadership failed to create accountability structures that would catch these patterns before an officer profiled a regional director on her first day of work. Kevin Marshall's career is over. That's justice. The federal government paid $5.4 million. That's compensation. FPS implemented new protocols. That's reform. But none of that changes what happened to Dr. Hayes. None of that erases the humiliation of being blocked from her own building on her first day as a federal executive. None of that restores what was taken. The dignity of walking into her workplace without being treated as a threat, the professional respect her position commands, the basic assumption that a black woman with an appointment letter might actually be the executive she claims to be. The real question is, what changes now? Do federal agencies finally track complaint patterns after 2 incidents instead of ignoring them through 8? Do security officers finally receive advance notice with photos of incoming executives so they can't claim ignorance? Do we finally acknowledge that black federal executives will face discrimination even at the highest levels of government service? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Marshall in position through 8 complaints, if we don't address the bias that taught him black women can't be regional directors, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next executive, the next blocked entrance, the next first day ruined by racism. Comment if you believe this should be law. Federal officers who block executive appointees from entering federal buildings after receiving advance notification face automatic termination and permanent disqualification from federal service. And if you think these stories matter, if you believe federal executives deserve to enter their own buildings without proving they belong, then hit that subscribe button right now. We're going to keep exposing how racial bias operates even at the highest levels of government. We're going to keep demanding agencies fire officers after 2 complaints, not 8. We're going to keep fighting for the federal executives, the career civil servants, the public servants who earn their positions and deserve basic respect. This isn't just about one officer or one director. It's about whether we're willing to accept a federal government where even executives with doctorate degrees and presidential awards aren't safe from racial profiling on their first day of work.